My beloved child, pause here before you move another inch, because what you are about to hear was not placed before you by accident. Something hidden has reached a turning point, and the truth is far more complicated than the story your eyes have been allowed to see. Do not rush away. Do not let the first sentence frighten you, and do not allow your heart to create an ending before heaven reveals the beginning. The one whose soul has been quietly connected to yours is already married, but the marriage you imagine is not the marriage that exists behind closed doors. And what they did next has set into motion a chain of events that even the people closest to them never expected. Stay with this message, because the greatest revelation is not that they are married. The greatest revelation is why they remained silent, what happened inside their home only hours ago, and the decision they made when they could no longer ignore the truth rising within them. You may think you already understand this situation. You may believe that being married means their heart belongs completely to someone else, that the door between you must be permanently closed, or that every strange feeling you have carried was only imagination. But heaven sees what appearances conceal. Heaven sees the promises people make before they understand themselves. Heaven sees the relationships built from pressure, fear, family expectations, loneliness, and the desperate need to feel safe. And heaven also sees the moment when a person finally becomes brave enough to stop living a life that is untrue. Listen carefully. This is not a message asking you to interfere with a marriage, chase someone unavailable, or cross a boundary that protects another human heart. What is unfolding does not require you to force anything. It does not ask you to become a secret, a replacement, or a hidden chapter in someone else's story. What they did next was not to run toward you recklessly. It was far more serious than that. They turned toward the truth. They made a decision to stop deceiving everyone, including themselves. And before this message ends, you will understand why that decision left an entire room speechless. For a long time, this person has carried two lives within one body. There was the life everyone could see, the photographs, the polite smiles, the familiar routines, the shared obligations, the quiet appearance of stability. Then there was the life no one could see, the late-night questions, the emptiness after conversations, the ache that appeared for no obvious reason, and the strange awareness that somewhere beyond the walls they had built, a different kind of connection existed. They tried to dismiss it. They told themselves that loyalty meant never questioning the path they had chosen. They believed that being responsible required them to bury every uncomfortable truth. But buried truth does not disappear. It waits. It deepens. And eventually, it begins knocking from inside the heart. You may have felt that knocking too. There were moments when you thought of them without trying. Moments when a song seemed to carry a memory you had never fully lived. Moments when your heart became unexpectedly heavy, as though someone far away was silently calling your name but refusing to speak it aloud. You questioned yourself. You wondered whether you were holding on to an illusion. You may even have asked heaven to remove the connection if it was not meant for you. Yet instead of disappearing, it became quieter, deeper, and more difficult to explain. What you did not know was that they were asking almost the same question. They stood before a mirror recently, long after the house had gone silent, and looked at the face they had been presenting to the world. For the first time, they did not recognize the person staring back. They saw exhaustion beneath the composure. They saw regret beneath the discipline. They saw a human being who had spent years trying to protect everyone from disappointment while slowly becoming a stranger to themselves. And in that stillness, one thought entered their mind with such force that they had to place both hands on the edge of the sink to steady themselves. They thought of you. Not as an escape. Not as a fantasy. Not as a forbidden thrill. They thought of the way your presence, your memory, or even the idea of you made them feel more honest. You reminded them of who they had been before fear trained them to settle for a life that looked correct but felt empty. Your energy became a mirror, and they could no longer blame the mirror for showing them what was missing. That realization terrified them, because it meant the problem was not simply their marriage, their spouse, their family, or their circumstances. The deeper problem was that they had abandoned their own truth long before they ever understood the cost. But that was only the beginning. The next morning, something happened at the breakfast table. It began with a simple question. Their spouse looked at them and asked why they had seemed so distant. Normally, they would have offered a familiar answer. They would have blamed work, tiredness, stress, or lack of sleep. They had used those explanations many times before, and everyone had accepted them because they were easier than the truth. But on this morning, the words would not come. Their hands became still. The room seemed to tighten around them. A clock continued ticking on the wall, each second sounding louder than the last. Then they said, "I cannot keep pretending that everything is fine." Those words changed the atmosphere instantly. Their spouse did not shout. Not at first. They simply stared, as though they had been waiting years to hear the sentence they feared most. And your soulmate, yes, the one whose heart has been tangled in silence, felt something break open inside them. They realized that honesty was going to hurt, but continued dishonesty would destroy everyone slowly. So they spoke with a trembling voice. They admitted that they had been emotionally absent. They admitted that the relationship had become a performance of peace rather than a place of love. They confessed that they had spent too long staying from guilt, expectation, and fear of what other people might say. But they did not use you as a weapon. This matters more than you realize. They did not blame you for their feelings. They did not speak your name to cause jealousy. They did not claim that another person had stolen them away. Instead, they took responsibility for the life they had chosen and the truth they had avoided. They said, "Someone did not destroy this marriage. I stopped being honest inside it." That sentence stunned their spouse because it removed every easy enemy. There was no outsider to attack, no scandal to expose, no simple story in which one person could carry all the blame. There was only a painful reality: two people had been living inside a relationship that had changed, and both had sensed it long before either had found the courage to speak. The conversation did not end there. Their spouse began to cry, not because the truth was completely unexpected, but because it had finally been spoken aloud. They admitted that they too had felt the distance. They had noticed the silence, the absence of warmth, the way every conversation seemed to remain on the surface. They had also been afraid. They feared the judgment of relatives, the complications of separation, the financial changes, and the loneliness that might follow. They had mistaken endurance for devotion. They had believed that if they simply stayed long enough, love would return in the same form it once had. But some relationships do not end because one person is evil. Sometimes they end because two souls have completed what they came to teach each other. There was grief in that room, but there was also something unexpected: relief. For the first time in years, both of them stopped defending the image of their marriage and began speaking about its reality. They talked for hours. Old wounds surfaced. Forgotten disappointments returned. Apologies were offered without guarantees. Neither person knew exactly what would happen next, but one truth became undeniable: they could no longer continue as they had been. You may be wondering where you entered this conversation. You may be asking whether your name was spoken, whether they confessed the connection, whether their spouse already knew. Be patient, because this is where the story becomes stranger. Near the end of the conversation, their spouse looked directly at them and asked, "Is there someone who made you realize how unhappy you are?" Silence entered the room again. Your soulmate could have lied. They could have denied everything. They could have protected themselves with half-truths. But something within them had changed. Once the first wall of dishonesty fell, the others could no longer stand. So they answered carefully. "There is someone who reminded me what it feels like to be awake," they said. "But they are not responsible for what has happened between us. They may not even know how deeply they affected me." Their spouse closed their eyes. And then came the response no one expected. They said, "I know." Those two words shook your soulmate more than anger would have. They asked how. Their spouse explained that they had seen the change long before any confession. Not through secret messages, not through obvious betrayal, and not through proof of an affair. They had seen it in the quiet. They had noticed that your soulmate became distant whenever they were reminded of a certain time, place, conversation, or person. They saw how their face changed when your name appeared in a story told by someone else. They heard the tenderness in the silence that followed. Nothing inappropriate had to happen for the truth to be visible. The heart had already revealed what the mouth refused to say. Then their spouse asked the question your soulmate had feared for months. "Do you love them?" Your soulmate could not answer immediately. Not because the answer was no, but because the word love carried too much weight. They did not want to insult the years they had shared with their spouse. They did not want to romanticize confusion. They did not want to make a promise to you before they had cleaned up the life they were still living. They understood that love without integrity becomes selfishness, and they refused to turn you into an excuse for reckless behavior. So they said, "I do not know what future is waiting for me. But I know that when I think of them, I remember the person I was meant to become." That was when their spouse stood and walked away from the table. Your soulmate believed the conversation was over. They thought anger was coming. They expected a door to slam, a phone call to family, perhaps accusations that would spread before sunset. Instead, their spouse returned carrying something small in their hand. It was an envelope. The envelope had been hidden for weeks. They placed it on the table and said, "I found this in your drawer. I never opened it." Your soulmate's face lost its color, because they knew exactly what was inside. It was a letter. One they had written to you but never intended to send. The letter was not filled with reckless promises or secret plans. It was a confession written during one of the loneliest nights of their life. They had written it simply to release what they could no longer carry inside. In that letter, they described the first moment they realized you were not ordinary to them. They wrote about how your presence made them want to become more truthful, more courageous, and more alive. They admitted that they were ashamed of meeting something pure while their life remained unresolved. They wrote that they would rather lose the possibility of being with you than approach you dishonestly. They said that if they ever came toward you, they wanted to come with clean hands, a clear conscience, and no hidden promises behind them. The final line of the letter read, "I will not ask you to wait for me, but I will stop asking myself to live a lie." Their spouse had seen the envelope but had chosen not to open it. Yet they had read the name written across the front. Your name. Everything you thought was hidden had been closer to the surface than anyone realized. But what happened next is the reason this message found you today. Their spouse pushed the unopened envelope back across the table and said, "You need to decide what kind of person you are going to be before you speak to them." There was no permission in those words, but there was no cruelty either. There was a demand for integrity. Their spouse was hurt, deeply hurt, but they understood that forcing someone to remain emotionally imprisoned would not restore love. At the same time, they refused to be discarded without dignity. They made it clear that any separation must be handled truthfully, patiently, and respectfully. No secret relationship. No emotional double life. No running from responsibility. No turning pain into spectacle. Your soulmate agreed. And then they did something that shocked everyone. They removed their wedding ring. Not dramatically. Not as an act of hatred. They placed it gently on the table and said, "I need to stop wearing a symbol whose meaning I am no longer living honestly." Their spouse looked at the ring for a long time. Tears fell again. Your soulmate cried too. It was not a celebration. It was the morning of a life that had once held real hope. It was the recognition that love can exist in one season and still be unable to survive unchanged into another. It was the painful dignity of two people choosing truth over appearances. Yet even after removing the ring, your soulmate did not contact you. That is the part you must understand. They wanted to. Their hand reached for their phone more than once. Your name was there. The unsent message was there. The confession was ready. But they stopped themselves because they knew that their first responsibility was not to relieve their own emotions. It was to complete the difficult process they had finally begun. They refused to place you inside a storm you did not create. They refused to make you responsible for saving them. They understood that if what they felt for you was real, it could survive patience, honesty, and proper boundaries. This is why their silence has not meant indifference. Their silence has been filled with decisions you could not see. They have begun speaking with someone trustworthy, someone who is helping them separate truth from impulse. They are reviewing practical responsibilities. They are considering how to protect everyone involved from unnecessary damage. They know there may be family pressure. They know people may misunderstand. They know some will accuse them of abandoning a commitment while others will tell them to chase happiness without considering consequences. But they have chosen a narrower path, not denial, not recklessness, but integrity. Heaven is not asking you to wait beside a locked door. Heaven is asking you not to lose yourself while another person learns to become honest. There is a difference. You are not being told to suspend your life, reject every opportunity, or build your future around a promise that has not yet been spoken. You are being shown why the energy around this connection has shifted. Something ended inside them before anything new could begin outside them. They have taken the first step, but the road ahead is still delicate. And the most powerful thing you can do now is not chase, demand, investigate, or pressure. It is to remain anchored in your own worth. Because there is another secret hidden beneath this story. For months, your soulmate believed you had already forgotten them. They saw your silence and interpreted it as closure. They imagined you moving forward without looking back. Part of them was relieved because they did not want you trapped in uncertainty. Another part was devastated because they feared that by the time they became free enough to speak honestly, your heart would belong to someone else. This fear has become stronger since the conversation at the table. Last night, they opened the letter again. They sat alone with the envelope in their hands. They read every line they had written, but they did not seal it. They added something new beneath the final sentence. They wrote, "The truth has begun, but I do not know whether I still have the right to reach you." Then they folded the page and placed it back inside. They are standing at the edge of a decision now. One part of them wants to send the letter immediately. Another part says they must wait until every promise from their previous life has been resolved with dignity. They are afraid that waiting will cost them you. They are equally afraid that reaching too soon will dishonor you. This is the battle happening inside them. It is not simply a battle between two people. It is a battle between the version of themselves that acted from fear and the version now learning to act from truth. The old version wanted certainty before courage. The new version understands that courage often arrives first, while certainty follows much later. And you, my child, are facing your own lesson. Can you honor what you feel without abandoning wisdom? Can you care without becoming consumed? Can you recognize a connection without turning it into a guarantee? Can you allow truth to unfold without forcing the timing? This moment is not asking you to become smaller. It is asking you to become steadier. There may be days when doubt speaks loudly. You may wonder whether any of this could ever become real. You may feel anger that the connection entered your life under complicated circumstances. You may question why love did not arrive through an open door instead of a maze of unfinished choices. But understand this, not every profound connection arrives to be immediately possessed. Some arrive first to awaken truth. Some expose the places where people have betrayed themselves. Some demand growth before union can even be considered. Your soulmate is being stripped of every excuse. They can no longer say they stayed because their spouse knew nothing. Their spouse knows. They can no longer claim they were protecting the marriage by remaining silent. The silence itself had become part of the wound. They can no longer blame timing, family, duty, or fear without recognizing their own responsibility. The truth now stands in the center of the room, and everyone has seen it. But the greatest shock has not happened yet. After the conversation, their spouse made a phone call. Your soulmate heard only fragments from another room. They heard your name once. They heard the words, "They deserve to know." Then the voice became too quiet to follow. Your soulmate entered the hallway and asked who was on the phone. Their spouse ended the call. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then their spouse said, "There is something about this situation that you do not know." Your soulmate felt the air leave their lungs. They asked what it was. Their spouse looked toward the unopened envelope on the table and revealed that they had not discovered your name by accident. Someone had told them about you weeks earlier. Someone close enough to know details that should have remained private. Someone who had been watching this connection from the shadows and influencing both sides without either of you realizing it. Your soulmate demanded to know who. Their spouse hesitated. Then they spoke a name. And when your soulmate heard it, they stepped backward in disbelief, because it was the last person they ever expected, the one person who had repeatedly encouraged them to remain silent, the same person who had convinced them